In the year 476 AD, the once mighty bastion of Roman power faced its dire culmination. The city of Rome groaned under siege, as Odoacer, leader of the Germanic tribes, marched into the heart of the empire. But it was not merely swords and blood that spelled the empire's fall, it was the rattling of coins, a sound becoming increasingly hollow as the denarius crumbled in value. In the chaos of this final siege, merchants and civilians alike clamored desperately to exchange their coins, their worth dwindling with each passing day. This moment, filled with intensity and uncertainty, symbolized not just a political defeat, but the crux of a monetary disaster that would unravel the very fabric of Rome. Throughout history, the decline of empires has followed a profound and predictable pattern. They do not falter randomly, rather, they succumb to an intricate cycle of economic decline, with currency collapse serving as the harbinger of greater turmoil. The denarius, once the backbone of Roman commerce, serves as a vivid warning of how military defeat can devastate monetary systems and societal stability. By the end of this exploration, you will grasp the warning signs that can portend the demise of any great power's economy. To understand the inevitability of this pattern, we must dissect the stages that precipitate an empire's collapse. The first stage is anchored in sound money, a trusted currency, tied to tangible assets, facilitating trade and investment. The denarius, introduced around 211 BC, initially flourished as a silver coin that represented stability and value. For centuries, it provided Romans with economic confidence, serving as the foundation upon which vast networks of trade were built. As the empire expanded, however, it increasingly relied on debt-funded growth to sustain its military campaigns and territorial ambitions, a second stage in our cycle. The financing of wars through loans led to exorbitant debt levels. In the 2nd century, as Rome reached its zenith, the denarius began to be overproduced. By the year 200 AD, the typical denarius contained only about 50% silver, undermining its intrinsic value. Investors and merchants could sense the looming crisis, akin to a clock winding down, the hands ticking ever closer to midnight as the genuine backing of the currency was diluted. As military expenditures ballooned, a familiar mode of coping manifested, the debasement of currency, our third stage. Coin clipping became rampant, a practice where coins were shaved to recover the precious metal lost in production. The denarius became lighter and lighter, losing weight and substance, a shadow of its former self. This loss of faith in the currency affected not only Roman merchants but the vast networks of trade across the empire. Between 235 and 284 AD, the value of denarius plummeted by approximately 90%. The resulting hyperinflation destabilized the economy, causing prices to skyrocket, leading to economic chaos. In the same way, today, we find parallels in countries that turn to monetary easing, where excess currency leads to inflation, worries of debasement echoing through markets worldwide. The fourth stage arrives with a loss of confidence. Once the populace perceives the intrinsic value of its currency is deteriorating, they retreat from its use. Bartering becomes common, and trust erodes rapidly, resembling a borrowed candle flickering in a tumultuous storm. The people no longer trust the denarius, leading to an economic recession and declining living standards. In the 270s AD, the Roman inflation crisis was so pervasive that people sought to trade goods and services outside of official channels, a reflection of their lost faith in the system. As Rome's currency crumbled, so did its status as a reserve currency, a pivotal moment illustratively symptomatic of the fifth stage. The denarius lost its standing beyond Rome's borders, foreign merchants began to refuse it in trade, opting instead for silver or gold. By the time Odoacer seized power in 476 AD, the once great empire no longer had the fiscal credibility to command respect. The Latin phrase quaes regio, ius religio, denoting the idea that political sovereignty determines religious practice, could be equally applied to economics. It illustrated that, ultimately, economic resources belong to whoever holds the power. The final stage is marked by collapse. Renewed cycles of chaos lead to resets of the monetary system. The fall of the Western Roman Empire exemplified this phenomenon. Civil war, coupled with foreign incursions, precipitated a breakdown, dismantling the existing order and paving the way for the Dark Ages. Emerging from the shadows would be new systems. Counterfeit coins echoed in later generations, resembling the financial mismanagement seen after the Weimar Republic collapsed, where the hyperinflation of the 1920s reduced the value of the German mark to that of mere paper. In contemplating this cyclical nature, we find resonance in the modern world. With vast debts accruing, policymakers frequently resort to similar paths, running the risk of echoing the Roman fate. Which empire do you think we are most like right now? Tell me below. Yet within this historical pattern lies an enduring fallacy, a false belief believed by many in positions of power, that we are different, it cannot happen to us. Each empire, at its peak, convinced itself that its strength and innovation provided an impermeable shield against currency collapse. This mindset is, however, a delusion stemming from ignorance of history's lessons. Rome believed in its exceptionalism, just as many nations do today, mistakenly assuming that they can circumvent the recurring cycles of history. This belief is precisely the marker of impending collapse, as it promotes complacency and hinders necessary reforms. Understanding these fixed stages elucidates the mechanics at play, recognizing that the mechanisms of debt, currency manipulation, and loss of confidence are unrelenting forces, regardless of the era. The underpinning of currency is fragile, as we witness modern parallels in rising debts, uncontrolled printing, and impending crises. We can read the warning signs clearly. Confidently navigating these waters, we understand the mechanics but not the outcomes. As monetary policy stretches the limits of credulity, an inevitable reckoning awaits. In reflecting upon these cycles, the myth of permanence dissipates like smoke. The denarius, once a symbol of unity and strength, deteriorated under the weight of hubris and mismanagement, teaching us that confidence is crucial but fragile. Our financial ledgers might change, our flags might differ, yet the ledger that truly matters, trust in currency, remains constant through time. The currency dies before the empire does. Subscribe to see the warning signs before they make the history books. As we further dissect the mechanisms that underpin the decline of empires through monetary failure, the story doesn't merely revolve around the denarius, but extends to other great powers in history, each illustrating the recurrent themes of expansion, debt, and eventual collapse. One key aspect lies in the ever-present tendency for empires to disregard the lessons of their predecessors, leading them to repeat the same mistakes that ushered in their downfall. Take, for instance, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome that survived for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of its western counterpart. Its currency, the solidus, remained relatively stable for much of its history, anchored by a gold standard that upheld its value. However, as military campaigns necessitated increased expenditures, Byzantine rulers, like Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, resorted to debasement of the solidus. By the late 11th century, the coin lost nearly 50% of its silver content, prompting rising prices and declining trust in the currency. As their military power waned against external threats such as the Seljuk Turks and later the Crusaders, the loss of confidence in the solidus unraveled financial stability. The people began to hoard wealth in various forms, finding a keen interest in tangible assets like gold and land rather than a flimsy currency rapidly losing credibility. Thus, like the denarius before it, the solidus eroded, displacing the economic framework of the Byzantine state and contributing to its eventual fragmentation. The cycle continues through to the early 19th century with the Spanish Empire, which operated under the weight of significant debts incurred during its global conquests. The influx of silver from the New World initially buoyed its economy, flooding Europe with precious metal. However, this Spanish silver glut led to rampant inflation, displacing the intrinsic value of currency. By 1600, prices for basic goods increased more than 5 times their previous values in just a few decades, severely impacting local economies. The mounting debt, paired with the inflationary spiral, created an unsustainable economic environment. Instead of fortifying their waning influence, the Spanish monarchy found itself relying on foreign loans and ultimately declaring bankruptcy on multiple occasions during the 17th century. The once dominant power was eventually eclipsed by rivals such as France and England, who learned from its missteps and sought to manage their monetary policies more judiciously. In the 20th century, the Weimar Republic in Germany provides a striking example of the consequences of hyperinflation. Despite their volatility, digital currencies reflect a yearning for an asset perceived as independent from governmental malfeasance. This shift in behavior portrays a restless search for confidence. The denarius, the solidus, and even the mark serve as cautionary tales for the instabilities that befall monetary systems marred by crisis and inaction. Rest assured, each cycle possesses an inherent false belief, a narrative perpetuated internally by ruling powers, the assumption of exceptionalism. Empires, in their heights, inherently carry an air of invincibility. The Romans believed their civilization would endure eternally, and each subsequent empire fell prey to the same flawed reasoning. Scholars and political leaders frequently assert that our political structure is more resilient, or our currency is backed by a superior economy. Such beliefs serve not as bastions against collapse, but as markers of a delusional mindset, blinding leaders to the systemic pressures mounting beneath the surface. The longer they remain entrenched in this belief, the closer they draw to the brink of economic ruin. In understanding how to read the warning signs of impending collapse, awareness of cyclical trends becomes paramount. We must remain vigilant, recognizing that elevated levels of debt, monetary manipulation, and loss of faith in currency are heralds of economic distress. History lends us a lens through which to evaluate modern circumstances, with each crisis echoing previous lessons of collapse. Awareness aids us in discerning patterns, enabling nations and individuals alike to exercise caution in times of economic exuberance or despair. As we reflect upon these narratives, we observe that the fundamental behaviors of empires and their currencies remain immutable, transcending time and borders. The apprehensions of debt and the consequences of currency manipulation echo through centuries, reminding us that economic systems are precarious by nature. The lessons of the past must inform our present actions, allowing us to navigate by the stars of history. These cycles obey a rhythm governed by human behavior, hope, ambition, folly, and ultimately tragedy. The denarius crumbled not solely under military might but through the accumulated weight of economic decisions driven by a desire for expansion with little regard for sustainability. Each empire's moment of hubris serves as a mirror reflecting our own choices today. Ultimately, the legacy of monetary history teaches us that financial systems can change with the fluttering of a flag on the horizon, yet the confidence in currency, once lost, is notoriously difficult to regain. Let these tales of the past serve as a compass for the future, cultivating an understanding that allows us to discern the telltale signs of impending crisis, so that we might avoid the fate of the denarius. The currency dies before the empire does. Subscribe to see the warning signs before they make the history books.